It's an honor for me to be here, especially in the presence of folks who do so much for the community. In the spirit of the actual event, I just want to say a few things. I think, coming to this event, it's important, I think, for when we talk about folks in the diaspora, the Kenyan diaspora, investing back home into y'all's country, right? I think it's incredibly important because I think one of the things our world has struggled with is we know that often in the African diaspora, when we travel to other countries or the treatment that we receive is not equal to how we see ourselves. It's not equal to what we brought culturally to the rest of the world. It isn't equal to who we are. It's not equal to what we've given, whether it's cultural, whether it's human rights, whether it's just the birth of humanity itself. And so I think many times what the world doesn't understand is the capacity and the capability of Africa. And so when we look at Kenya, I think investing back into Kenya, a stronger Kenya, right, is a Kenya and is a part of Africa that can help the rest of the world understand what we contribute and what we have contributed as a diaspora, as a people. I don't know if that's a take that everybody has brought to the table, but I think it's incredibly important in that the Kenyan voice, especially as we have so many Kenyans in our city of Brooklyn Park, the Kenyan voice is an important voice. And I'm not going to call any other African cultures out, but Kenyan culture tends to be a little bit more humble. Right? I'm not going to call out the people. I'm not going to call out the cultures that are not humble, right? We don't need to do that. They know who they are, you know who they are, we know who they are. But I will say that because of that humbleness, I don't think Kenya always toots y'all on own horn. You don't talk about what you have contributed. You do not talk about what you can contribute. And then people often take that for granted. So I think investing back home is incredibly important. But I also think it's important, a little bit self-interested here, that we invest in where we are here now. So we talk about our city of Brooklyn Park. I just want to kind of lay out some of the work that we're doing in Brooklyn Park. And much of this work is aimed at our communities. So in Brooklyn Park, the easiest way for me to start is Brooklyn Park is the 5th or 6th largest city in our state. We believe we're the 5th largest. Doesn't always show up in the census because we have a huge immigrant population and we don't always come out for the census. We don't always trust the census. And I get that. But we're probably 87,000 strong. The number 4 is Wilmington. They're about probably 89,000 or 90,000. Their commercial property values, and I was telling somebody this earlier, is they're about $5.5 billion in terms of commercial property values. We are $2 billion in this city of Brooklyn Park. That's a $3.5 billion difference. For those of you who live in Brooklyn Park, you know that kind of cascades down into you paying higher taxes maybe than someone in Bloomington. I don't like it. I know y'all don't like it. So we have to cover that gap. And it's an opportunity though. And I don't think people always look at it as an opportunity. But when we look at covering that $3.5 billion gap, one thing that Brooklyn Park has that very few other metro areas in the entire United States have is we got 700 acres of undeveloped land. And one thing our city has done is said 200 acres of that are going to be a biotech district. Why that is important is because when you look at Maple Grove, which is just up the street, and for those who are visiting, you don't need to waste your time visiting Maple Grove. I'm just going to give you a picture of you. Brooklyn Park is where it's at. But from Maple Grove through Brooklyn Park, through like Coon Rapids, we have a ton of medical device companies and biotech companies. And so what our city has said is that similar to a Mayo Clinic in Rochester, we're going to have a biotech district. We're going to be open for business to support biotech here. Why that is important is because you know that very often when it comes to communities like ours, diverse communities, when it comes to biotech, when it comes to cutting edge technology, people often overlook us for those opportunities. So our city is going to fight to make sure we have a biotech district. And then people and kids who live in the southern part of Brooklyn Park who would never have those opportunities, whether Kenyan, Nigerian, Liberian, African American, Oromo, all these different Somalia, all these different communities. We're going to fight to make sure that they get opportunities to be in biotech, whether it's a job they can get right out of high school paying $60,000 a year, or they can grow into management, middle management, or they can be upper management, right? But there are opportunities there. Here's the other thing that I need people to be very aware of. Brooklyn Park is 60% people of color. That means that as we develop that 700 acres, the people who own that need to be 55-60% people of color. It needs to represent the people in the community. So we're going to need your help with that, right? Just like you help by sending back to Kenya and investing in Kenya. And by the way, I'm going to invest in Kenya. I got to visit first. I got to say that first. I got to visit first, and I got to find out what I'm investing in. My wife is going to make sure of that. But we're going to visit first, right? But just like you invest there are opportunities here that we want the community to be aware of. So if we're building a biotech area, that means there needs to be housing, there needs to be restaurants, there needs to be amenities, there needs to be entertainment, retail, all sorts of things, right? And so we're leaning into our city saying, look, we've got this diversity. We're not gonna run from this diversity, we're gonna double down on the diversity. Let's make sure the ownership is there. And then as we start businesses to surround that biotech or to be part of that biotech, or to even service biotech, we're gonna fight as hard as possible to make sure it represents our community. So it's incredibly important that even as you invest back home, as you understand that there are opportunities here that can help you further invest back home and vice versa, right? Because we in Brooklyn Park are beginning to say, look, it's not like the old days. So the initial waves of immigrants that came through, Italians, Irish, Polish, other groups, when they came to America, they said, I'm American, I happen to be, and I'm just gonna be a white American. And that's it. It was not, I'm going to invest back home. It wasn't a lot of going back and forth back home. It was a different approach. Well, we realized in Brooklyn Park that, no, if you came from Kenya, you're not gonna cut off all those relationships back home. Family is everything. The village is everything, right? Keeping those relationships open and that back and forth is incredibly important. And so we're saying as a city, we understand that. Let's lean into that. So yes, as you invest here, also invest back home, but how do we, and folks can talk to me offline about this, how do we begin to have conversations about saying, let's have trade back and forth, right? Let's have the cultural exchanges. Because if you live here, it's a much smaller world. We've got Zoom, we've got virtual, we've got so many different things. So how do we invest to make sure that we are talking back and forth and keeping those exchanges open? It's incredibly important. I also think it's a way for us all to prosper, because if you can't prosper in it, you're not really talking about much of anything. That's one thing that we've learned. So I'm not going to talk too much longer about that, but I just want folks to know that I'm very much in support of business, whether it is folks partaking overseas and creating partnerships over there. One of my good friends actually has an IT company, and he sources some of his IT folks out of Kenya, right? So we're living in that world. And that's an African-American brother that has said, I know what's going on in Kenya. I'm gonna start doing business, right? So we're realizing that. So know that I'm supportive of that. I'm also supportive of investing and creating a special place in Brooklyn Park. The last thing I'll close out on is that Brooklyn Park is a special place, and I don't want people to ever forget that. If we are 55-60% people of color, 35 to 40% of that is African heritage, and a large part of that is Kenyan, right? We do not want the city to turn to a place where Kenyans show up for 15, 30, 40 years and then disperse. We're saying we have a cultural opportunity here with the diaspora here. How do we ensure that in our city that diaspora is respected, and 40, 50, 60, 75 years from now, much of the diaspora is here, but there are cultural and business, financial, social institutions here that respect those who came and built something here. We want to build a monument to that in Brooklyn Park. So I'm going to leave it at that, but I want to say thank you to everybody for the opportunity to speak here. I love what's going on here. You already captured my attention on this thing, so I think it's important.